It's a lot of research. It's good.
All right. So just checking. All right. So just making sure we're getting everything connected right now. Everyone on YouTube, on Twitter, everyone on Twitch is connected right now. Just making sure everything else is okay. Awesome. Okay, so everyone on Facebook as well and LinkedIn, hi everyone. So everyone that's watching, you can definitely feel free to message at any point if you want to do any questions. We're mixing it up a little bit this time. So I'm just going to start. So hey guys, welcome to the CPD Junkie podcast, #lockdown special, where every night at 8 p.m. we bring you interviews with dentists sharing their CPD stories and journeys from around Australia. What better way to learn than to follow those who've already done it before? CPD Junkie is Australia's most comprehensive CPD. So head over to cpdjunkie.com.au and become a member for free to access the full features of the site. CPD, I'm your host, Lawrence Doan, and tonight we're joined by Dr. Amelia Judson. Originally from Bogan Gate, where her family has lived for over 100 years, she decided at the age of 12 that dentistry was for her. She graduated from CSU in Orange, where she discovered her musical talents in DJing around the campus. She even played at the Future Music Festival on her 20th birthday. However, the club scene wasn't for her, and soon after graduating, joined Smile Solution Collin Street in Melbourne, before eventually transitioning back to Sydney to work at FY Smile in Double Bay. Her special interest lies in cosmetic dentistry and facial aesthetics. In her eyes, it is the perfect combination of science, engineering, medicine, and art to enhance the smile to create the best version of self that a person presents to the world. Dr. Emilia Judson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I need to take you around as like my hype beast wherever we go. I love it.
So here's a girl from the small country town of Bogan Gate, of around 300 people, decides to go into dentistry at CSU, self-funds her degree by starting a business as a DJ at the age of 18, and then goes on to becoming signed and play at Future Music Festival within 2 years on your 20th birthday. So let's talk about your undergrad dental life for a second.
It was a wild time. I feel like it's interesting when I look back at it, because I think at the time a lot of my classmates would have been like, what the hell are you doing? But when I look back at it, it actually makes a lot of sense in terms of where I've ended up in regards to the skills that I learned through DJing. So for example, social media, marketing, also like how to work with people, because when you're working with a crowd and like managing people, they're coming up drunk, asking for stupid requests, learning how to be like, that's nice, but I don't have it on my laptop, sorry. So yeah, no, it was good. It was a juggling act at times, especially in the latter years, because when you're flying sort of interstate or back and forth to Sydney with gigs, not a lot of sleep on weekends. Like I'd play a set from like, I don't know, 1 till 3. It was interesting, but I loved it. It was fun while it lasted. And then I got to the point where I was like, yeah, it's time to retire. I need my weekends back. I would like Saturdays for golf. That would be nice.
But come on, I mean, like, who would have thought of starting, a business in, or at that point, or even DJing, for at that point of 18, and then, using that to fund it. That's definitely different for a lot of people who are probably just, going in and then they're just not studying. I mean, they're not working, they're just studying on it. But yeah,
it was good. It was one of those things that I think you become, when you're so used to going out and working when everyone else is partying, it changed the way that I saw clubbing. So unless I was being paid to be there, I didn't really want to be there. But yeah, it was good. It was a really interesting experience in terms of learning a lot about business and how to run a business too, because dentistry, as much as we do or don't like it, it's a business at the end of the day in the way that we structure things as well. And so we need to keep that in mind whilst giving the best outcomes possible for patients.
Fair enough. Do you want to be a dentist in the morning and DJ at night?
I used to be. I come out of retirement a couple of times a year. So our FY Smile end of year Christmas party, I come out. I come out of retirement from Melbourne Cup as well. And I'm actually potentially going to teach Dr. Yassmin how to DJ because he got a set of decks for his 50th birthday last year. So I don't know. Maybe I'll do a live stream in the future. We'll see.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So is it true that you had a video titled "Me plus CSU equals the superhuman"?
Oh. I don't really like to publicly make that known. I actually don't know where it is. It's somewhere in cyberspace. Do not go looking for it. It's an experience. So I try and explain to people, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a cross between Gangnam Style, James Bond, and a dentist. They're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I was a little bit I'm still a loser, but I was definitely a bit of a loser back then.
It's all good. It's all good. We all have our past, you know, but
we all have skeletons in the closet, as they say.
That's right. That's right. What's the spiffy time?
I haven't used that word in so long. A spiffy time is like, it's just like a good and classy time. Like it's a good time, but like in a nice way. I don't know. Urban Dictionary, I'm sure that probably will come up with a weird definition, but yeah.
Did it have anything to do with how you were getting the regional scholarship at CSU?
Yeah, well, that was a massive help for me, especially like it was very useful in first year because you have so many costs associated. I don't think a lot of people realize this until they start dentistry. You have your loupes, you have your instruments, like it's a number of thousands of dollars to actually buy the stuff that you need to be able to be doing the course that you're doing. And you don't have the option to choose other suppliers necessarily. You have to go through the recommended one because, to be honest, they do give you a good discount in what they're offering you. So yeah, that was a massive help back when I was starting off because I wasn't quite fully formed as a DJ yet. So definitely helpful, even though I had to dance my little pants off for it.
No, that's all good. It's all good. I mean, I remember those days we were out to cut through all the tooth models, and then that would cost a lot. So
yeah, those the what are the models called? Nissan. I was having this discussion with someone the other day. I was like, you should start a business like printing little like off-market ones. Not that I said that, but
business
like
idea just thrown out into the world.
Yeah, $13 a pop. That's like 2 beverages at the bar night. Seriously.
Exactly. And then if you just nick the next one, you know.
Yeah.
So you're heavy into cosmetic dentistry and facial aesthetics. Tell us about your CPD journey so far.
So I've had a mixed bag. I feel like it's one of those things with cosmetic dentistry. You have to look at it in a very holistic way, even though you're just focusing on, from what the patient thinks, the front area. And I think that's a massive thing that you learn with digital workflows. So like we have a very strong digital base. I feel like particularly working with Dr. Fadi, he is a bit of a unicorn, which is really interesting to see. Like you have to be strong in a lot of different facets or have a strong relationship with somebody else to outsource to. So in his case, like being amazing with sort of the gum grafting, surgical side of things, and the reconstructive implant side of things, looking at the orthodontic positioning, looking at the actual like constructive veneer side of things, looking at the bite, like it's really multifactorial. And I think sometimes we can be looking at cases and being like, oh, wow, like that looks straightforward. It's like, no, like massive Dunning-Kruger effect where the more you know about cosmetic dentistry, the more you're like, oh my God, I really don't know. It's like there's so much that I don't know. Like it's crazy. So yeah, I think it's been a case of picking things that I think are at my level of what I need to know. So for example, I did a really good course earlier this year with Dr. Julia Annas, in Melbourne actually, and it was in Botox. I feel like filler is one, I've had this discussion with a couple of people. I feel like filler is such an art form. You need to do it a lot to be very good at it. And especially working in Double Bay, most people already have their plastic surgeon who does their filler for them. But with Botox for us, it's very important, especially with cases, for example, like all on 4 cases. As you're retraining the proprioception of the jaw, being able to relax those masseters and the temporalis and those things that cause a lot of force as the brain sort of figuring out, okay, what's going on down here? That's a useful skill to have. So yeah, I think it's just one of those things. You need to figure out the building blocks and where you're at as well. Like if you're going to go out and do a full-blown extensive course of all on 4 or of like a full mouth rehab and you've been out for 6 months, great. You're going to learn a lot about what's possible. but you may not actually be at the stage where that's a reasonable thing to be thinking about doing on people.
Fair enough. So you're saying, I mean, so how did you start then through that process? So you started with, you know, the ortho, the injectables, like, and how would you just suggest to structure it?
I think I was really, really blessed to start off with by the fact that I did start with Smile Solutions in Melbourne, because the way that Kia, who is the practice owner, structured it was there's 40 chairs. It's a vertical system of every single specialist in the dental book. And so as a new grad, that was really interesting to see someone who comes in as a consult, just with a general dentist, you're figuring out, okay, what do they want? What do they need? And then who's the relevant person to then refer off to make that happen? So it then becomes a case of like very comprehensive, complex dentistry, but all in the one space and a lot of people talking to each other. So from a learning perspective, it's like dipping your toes in and seeing, okay, well, this is different areas in which to focus on. So to begin with, I think people always talk about communication courses, which I do think are really, really important. I've actually never done an official communication course, but I learned a lot from watching my colleagues. So two dentists in particular who I worked with down there who were very, very good at it were Dr. Fiona Kelly and Dr. Anthony O'Rourke. And then there's also Dr. Ivana Timmerman, who's an endodontist there, who's very good. She's like very zen for an endodontist. Like when people go in stressed out of their mind about having a root canal, she's just like the most calming presence, just to be like, everything's going to be okay. This is what's happening. And that's all right. We'll go down this road. She's great. But yeah, I learned a lot from just watching other people and training in that way. And then there's a lot of great sort of early on courses in terms of dipping your toes in and then figuring out which direction. So like there's like Young Dentist Hub, there's General Dental Residency. And I think they're structured to be very good for people who are earlier on in their career. I think I was listening to the talk with the podcast the other day and someone was mentioning you can do a course that sometimes it's like a little bit too beyond where you're actually at, which is not a bad thing because it's really important to have a good general idea, even if you're referring people out, of what is possible and what is appropriate and what the options are. But sometimes you're just not at that point yet to be like, yeah, let's take a go at this, see what happens.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, some of the viewers probably don't know, but you've got a diploma of communication.
Yeah, that was it was good. Basically I did throughout high school this thing called speech and drama, but it's basically like public speaking. It was maybe like 12 years of when I looked back at it, I was like, yeah, it was a pretty lengthy time. And so I ended up doing a thesis, the most random thesis ever about styles of communication. And my three people that I chose were Dr. Seuss, Oprah, and Adolf Hitler. Okay. I don't know how super random, but they all had very different styles in the way they would communicate with people. And I think everyone has such a different style. I know a lot of people say like prime speak is really, really good. I think there are so many different ways that work for different people's personality types. And it also depends on who you're speaking to on the other end of the patient. Like you can't take a cookie cutter approach and go to everyone and think that it's going to work, because that's just not how people are. You need to listen. Listening is like a very important skill to learn. A lot of people think that they do, but they don't necessarily really hear. They hear what they want to think a lot of the time, I think. But yeah, it's one of those situations you learn other people's styles, test it out, see what you're doing well and what could be improved. Say, for example, like Dr. Fadi, when he comes in and speaks to a patient, a lot of the time people have sought him out specifically. So he'll just tell them what they need and they're like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Whereas people who are earlier in their career, you have to build that rapport and that trust and also convey the value of what you're doing. And I think you yourself actually have to believe in the value of what you're doing, because as a new grad, it's pretty confronting going from like selling, not selling, but like treatment planning a $50 filling at university. And then all of a sudden that $50 filling is now a $300 filling. And you're like, I don't know, like this is a weird, uncomfortable leap to make. I'm still doing the same thing, but the value of my time is very different now. So it's one of those things. I think working on your clinical competence will change your ability to convey and communicate a lot too.
Yeah. I mean, and then that transition from that, 300 to 30,000 kind of treatment plan. That's
Well, this is the interesting thing. The first cosmetic case that I did like that in Melbourne was actually with Dr. Fiona Kelly. And I had this case, I knew what it needed, but I just said to her, I actually don't feel comfortable having that conversation, and I don't know how to have that conversation. Like, that's a big thing to say to someone. And so she was really amazing and generous in her time. And she said, look, I'm more than happy to treatment plan it with you, sit down, have that conversation, make sure everybody's on the same page, and work through with you to do the clinical aspect of it too. So I think the people that you have around you have a really huge impact in being able to learn and helping you spread your little wings that are slowly growing to fly.
So, I mean, I think we kind of dabbled in it, but of all those CPDs, what's had the biggest clinical impact on your dentistry today?
I think I'm in a very unique situation in the sense of the practice that I work in, which I feel very, very blessed to be within. So a lot of the time, like Dr. Yassmin's obviously a key opinion leader for digital smile design. So I'm being taught every day. I act as his shadow essentially in a lot of stuff that we do with All-in-4 and DSD. So a lot of the courses that I do are to bolster things that I'm learning within. But with that said, there are fundamentals that have been very, very useful. So I wasn't a person to jump straight into, oh, I'm going to go do this veneer course, or I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I think I looked at it in terms of what am I going to actually use on a regular basis? Because it's one thing to do a course and do it out of the love and the passion. But I look at it and sort of say, okay, in the next 12 months, how much value would this bring to my patients and what I'm doing from a day-to-day perspective? So one course that really stands out to me that is really good, because I knew a lot about the digital workflow, but I didn't know how to do CEREC. I was like, oh yeah, like I understand it, but I've never actually done it. And so the CEREC files team, Dr. Lawrence Lau and Dr. Alistair Graham, they're really, really good. They do them in a couple of different cities, I believe. But it was great because I see all this complex stuff all the time, but I didn't have the fundamentals there necessarily to build out. And also just like problem solving, being able to design stuff digitally and then mill it and print it in-house really quickly is a very useful thing. And it can shift the way that you treatment plan stuff, even as like temporary measures. For example, we were treatment planning something with Dr. Fadi the other day, and we were saying, we were trying to figure out how many appointments at the station we would need. And he wants to do like a bite lift essentially. And we were sort of trying to figure out, do we get them to do it and then come back and cement? Like, what's the process? And I said, well, now that I know how to actually design, how about you do the prep to start off with? I'll go away, design them, mill them, bring them back to you. And then you can do it on the same day. Like, it makes it so much more flexible and easy, and you can be really nimble on your feet to do stuff. So that was a very, very useful course, and one that I actually feel like, well, I know I've already been using it a lot. Like, it's interesting. And they've got 2 as well, which is good. I haven't done the second one yet, but it's on the list of things to do. Yeah, I think that's one of the really good ones. I tend to agree with a lot of people when they say you have those big courses where like there's a lot of people speaking. They're sort of more like the greatest hits of dentistry. They're very inspirational, but you don't like, I try to be positive, and I'm always like, oh, surely there's something that could come out of this. But it's more like a teaser and a taster of like, where are you headed? What are you interested in? Having said that, though, sometimes it can make you realize, oh, I didn't think that I really found that area fascinating. And now that I've heard like a really passionate speaker talk about it for an hour and a half, maybe I am. Maybe I'm more open to it. So yeah, it's cool.
Cool. So, I mean, we kind of dabbled in it a little bit already, but for a lot of new and recent graduates, that they're heavy in social media, and they're in that period where they're kind of transitioning from their personal social life to a more professional dental presence. And they look at cosmetic dentistry as it's the be all and end all. You know, they want to create these beautiful aesthetic porcelain smiles. And as someone who's gone through that transition and now into cosmetic dentistry, you know, what would you say to some of these graduates? I mean, we talked about the highlight reels, and, you know, it's not all that in 6 months' time, but
yeah, I think it's a very interesting space. And I had this conversation a lot with a couple. I've got a group of girlfriends that I catch up with from various different universities who graduated at the same time. And I think we sort of came to the conclusion that it's a very double-edged sword. So like, it's awesome in terms of inspiring you to see what you can achieve. But it's kind of similar in the respect of like, you have all these like big bootied Instagram baddies out there, angles, lighting, Photoshop. It can be very similar in dentistry. And I didn't realize this probably until like the last 12 months, that it is not uncommon for people to Photoshop their work. And like most photography courses or books that you read, they explain to you how to do it. The level of retouching, like you never know what's actually going on in the background. And I think it's well, just like the pure amount of work that people appear to be pumping through is quite interesting as well. Like I feel like sometimes you can get this feeling of, oh yeah, I've issued 5 sets of Invisalign and I've done 2 full mouth rehabs and an all-on-4 upper arch, and it's not even lunchtime yet. And having worked with like, Fadi is amazing at what he does. Seeing the time and like the painstaking work and planning that goes into it, he'll happily sit there for 6 to 7 hours just doing surgically guided preps, because that's the time that you need to put in to get exceptional results. And so I think sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, like you compare your challenging days where you're really not struggling necessarily, but like you're not creating these crazy pieces of art, and be like, oh, why am I not like that? And it's like, well, most people aren't like that on a daily basis either. It's the highlights, and that's fine. Like we really always should be striving towards something better. But I think it's also being realistic about what is achievable, because it can be really disheartening, and you sort of like, well, what hope do I have? But like, as long as you're comparing yourself to yesterday in terms of your clinical abilities, and know that you're doing the best you can for your patients, like that's the important part. Yeah.
I mean, veneers are in, and it's all over Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Everyone wants the quick fix now. Has your views changed of what it was initially to what it has now? Or
I think it's really important, the education piece of it. Like it's interesting when I talk to friends who are non-dental friends, they know how to pick a really bad set of veneers, but they don't necessarily have the education around what is good and what is considered a good treatment plan. And so I think as well, like we as dentists, we often like to post our work, which is great, but for the average patient, they don't really care. Like, to be honest, they're like, okay, cool. Like that's a massive blood and bone and things. I don't really know what I'm looking at. And so like from an aspirational side of things, that's great. But the education piece of like, what is considered a good option, like some of the trends you see on TikTok it's just crazy. Like I sit there and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is literally a hot dumpster fire. What are you doing? I think especially for young people, because I always explain, like even the best, most beautiful done veneers in the world, they don't last forever. Like whether it be the glue or the glue that I explained to them breaks down, or the tooth underneath gets soft, or you medically change. Like it's very similar. Again, I work in Double Bay. I liken it to if you get a boob job done, you're going to have to replace them in 15, 20 years time. It's just how it is. It's the biological cost. And it's the same with teeth. It's one of those things. If you start when you're 21, you go down that road, you want to be damn sure you want to keep going down it. And in some cases, it's totally appropriate. In other cases, it's like, well, the thing that makes me the saddest actually is when you see on Instagram someone's before photos and you're like, actually, they were nicer than the after. Like that really breaks my heart. I'm like, oh God. But then it can be an incredibly transformative thing. And it's, I think, coupling a couple of different treatment modalities and making patients understand too that it's not just like a snap your fingers and we're there. Like 90% of cases we deal with are orthodontics, Invisalign before veneers. And so a lot of the time they're like, oh, do I really need it? And I think that's the beauty of digital workflow as well, is you can show them a mock-up of like before Invisalign if you were to do veneers and after Invisalign if you were to do veneers. And they can physically see that difference in their mouth. And they're like, oh yeah, that makes more sense. Because they might think they have straight teeth, but it's like, well, we're trying to limit the amount of camouflaging and limit the amount of tooth structure that we're actually physically removing. Because at this stage, the technology that we have, we can't grow that back. We kind of only get one shot with that. So we want to make sure that we're pretty particular about how we do that.
Or it might just be, restructuring it into the right position. They just look a bit off, but it just needs to be in the right place, right?
Yeah, and you see some amazing work. I've seen so many great cases of bonding by people on Instagram where like they do some whitening, they do a bit of bonding here and there, and you're not going down this road where it's like, okay, we're committed now. Like we often get cases coming to us who are having redos done because they're not actually that happy with the result. And when you take the veneers off and you see what's left, it's heartbreaking because you're like, oh, well, now like we've just got to work with what we have, but this was not really planned that well. So I think planning is like a really big thing in within that
space. Yeah. So I've got an interesting quote from an interesting poet. You know, she said, you know, my patients and their mouths share some of their deepest, darkest secrets. They tell me about the challenges they've faced. Does that sound familiar?
I don't know about poets. Maybe I should start trying to be a rapper. No, that would not end well. I'm not. No.
You've got the beats. You've got the beats.
I've got the beats, but I would always have to get other people to MC because I don't like my voice over microphone. I don't think it's like deep enough, or I don't know. It just sounds weird. I don't like it. But
Yeah.
No, I think it's one of those things, and that's the thing that I love about dentistry. And I think all those dentists out there who have had those moments with patients where you know that you've genuinely changed somebody's life with what you've done, like that's a pretty cool superpower. And especially like working in the all on four realm, like every Friday we tend to do like inserts, and I'm always there just crying in tears with them because I'm like, this is really beautiful. Like the stories that you hear of where they sort of come from and how they've ended up like that, or even back when I was on placement. I was saying to you before, I was on placement in Penrith, which was an experience. But like people who have been through some really rough shit, basically, and like whether it be addiction or like life just handed them a really crappy set of cards, and they look at themselves, and it's hard to sort of rise out of that and be like, yes, like I'm going to make a change, and I'm worthy and I'm valuable to like put myself first. When you see a monster looking back in the mirror, and I'm not being rude about it, it's just a fact of like, when you've got decaying teeth and things are falling out, and like we've had patients who literally stick teeth back in with super glue, like that's not a way to live. It's really sad. And then they have something that changes, and they can see for the first time looking back at them in a mirror, oh, this is the person that I've always felt inside. I just haven't been able to outwardly show to people. It's really special. And I think it's, yeah, the instant change of like you have the surgery done and then 3 days later you put the teeth in, but it's also the 6 months after, the follow-ups, the upkeep, seeing how they change the way they dress, they change the way they bring themselves to the world. They've got a new partner, they've gone for that job promotion. Like psychosocially, teeth have such a huge impact. It's crazy, and it's really amazing to see how it changes the way that people bring themselves to the world.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You know, we're talking about deep, dark secrets, but have you come across any, I mean, do you have, you know, some of your struggles or dilemmas that you've come across during your dental journey?
Indefinitely, burnout, hugely so.
Talk to us about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if like maybe people would have suspected it potentially. I don't know, but basically, I was going really hard the first 2 years out of university. Like I was working 6 days a week. I was spending Sundays shooting content, and I ended up having like a full-blown like quarter life crisis when I was 23. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not happy. Like it wasn't dentistry at the end of the day. I think it was just my perception of, and it was interesting, like similarly when I played at Future Music Festival, when you hit a goal and it doesn't make you happy, you're like, oh, what's going on? I thought I was meant to be happy when I achieved this. And so I just started like resenting what I was doing for a long time. And I ended up sort of stepping back and doing like a lot of searching within myself, and dabbled in a bit of marketing for a while, which was cool. I moved back to Sydney because it was just one of those situations where I'd had a relationship breakdown in Melbourne, and I'd stuck around for a while, but I was quite a bit closer to my family again. And I just need to take a breather away from what I'm doing. And I ended up coming back, and I was working like 2.5 days a week, which I think is really awesome with dentistry because you can have that ability to step away and not work quite as much, but still live a reasonable lifestyle. And then, interestingly enough, when I was doing the marketing side of things, Nicola, who's our practice manager and business manager at FY Smile, I think she'd been stalking me for a little while, and she reached out being like, oh, hey, I want to talk to you about marketing. And at this stage, FY was still like in the pipeline, and she was telling me what was planned. And turns out she never actually wanted any marketing advice from me. She was just like, I just wanted a reason to talk to you so I could get a feel for you. And then that's when they reached out and said, do you want to come on board with the team? We're starting the practice in Double Bay. And I was like, yes, that would be amazing. And I, in the last 12 months, have really fallen back in love with dentistry. And I really am very grateful for the team around me for that. Like, they're very passionate people. And like, Fadi's just crazy. He'll send me like 5:30 on a Sunday morning, a picture of a case being like, look at this. And I'm like, it's 5:30 on a Sunday morning, but I love it. Yes, it's amazing. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that I learned was, it's as cheesy as it sounds, it's the journey. You have to love the journey, because otherwise it's not worth it. Like, no destination is going to make it worth it. And I feel very blessed within dentistry to have found that again, because a lot of my friends who work in other industries, they're like, yeah, I'm there for the paycheck. Like, I'm doing this. I work to live. I don't live to work. But I think you can find a healthy way of living to work, because it has a really like fulfilling purpose and role in your life. So yeah, it was challenging for a little bit there though, because I was like, I wanted to do this since I was 12. Why is this not making me happy anymore? Yeah.
I mean, it is tricky, because obviously you were working 6 days, but you still had that one day, you know, you didn't call it work, but you were doing the marketing, which is, I mean, in hindsight, would you look back at it and say that's probably, you were actually working 7 days a week?
Yeah, but I wouldn't have done it any different, I think. It's one of those things, I think, especially in our society and the way that we're all very like A-type personalities. We're like, oh, got to do things, got to get like progression. And in my mind, I was like, oh, if I work 6 days a week compared to working 3 days a week, I'm going to grow doubly as quickly. But I very soon learned that that's not the case. And it's interesting, like, again, I'm such a cliche dentist, I've taken up golf. And it's the same with golf, for example. If you go and have lessons done every single day, you're not going to get any better. It's something that takes time. And so like, yeah, it's a level of exposure, but also if you're dragging and grinding yourself into the ground, like it's not productive for anyone. It's another cliche, but I'm always like, you need to fill your cup up before you start filling other people's up, or like filling other things, because ultimately, like, if you're not in a good space, it's not going to work. You can make it work for so long, but then you hit a wall and you're just like, nah, I'm done. Like, this is not working.
Yeah, 100%. I think someone else like Omar was saying to me at one point, you know, you might be working 6 days, or you might be working 5 days. And then if you take 2 days to doing CPD as well, that's not really time off. It's really, you're still just working, you know, you really got to have time to yourself to kind of just recoup and then build off and relax and unwind a little bit.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we glorify as well. Like, we look at people who are like, oh, I'm doing like 6-7 days a week. And you're like, oh, you're crazy, you're killing it. And it's like, no, you're killing yourself. Like, it's just too much. Like, I'm all for passion, but yeah, you have to do it in a sustainable way, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, then the other discussion is about for like recent graduates who want that Bugatti car, you know, up really quick, or getting that nice house, especially given this competitive Sydney environment, you know.
Yeah.
Working between, you know, that fine balance of not living too far out of your means and all of that, isn't it?
And I think it's one of those things, I think you really need to hone down to ask yourself, why do you want those things? Why do you need those things? Like, not to be like a hippie, because I definitely like nice things, but it's like, are you doing this for you, or are you doing this for something else? Like, yeah, I think again, another cliche, Will Smith, I'm not big, like crazy Will Smith fan, but he has a very famous quote that's like, you spend all your life working to make money to buy shit for things that, like, to show people who don't really care about you or think about you that you're important or someone. And it's like, at the end of the day, just be happy within yourself. Like, it's, everybody's too busy thinking about their own little world to be noticing what you're doing. So yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So what would you say your current ideal clinical day kind of looks like? You know, the type of procedures you might be getting up to?
It's a mixed bag. I feel like that's the thing I like about dentistry. It's a variety. It's interesting at the moment. Like, it depends on what's happening in the world as well. At the moment, I've had a lot of wisdom teeth extractions booked in, because everyone's like, oh, I'm in lockdown, I've got some spare time. Looks like I'm going to get those 8s taken out. So it's been good. Although it's interesting because you get so used to doing sort of checks and cleans and like restorations, CERECs here and there, that when you start doing longer appointments back to back to back, you realize the sort of clinical stamina that you need to have to be able to do that. Like, I'll work alongside Fadi on a surgical day, and he'll smash out like 2 upper arch and lower arch all on 4s, just like that. And then I'm like on the floor after I've done like back-to-back 3 wisdom teeth, like full removal. And I'm like, oh gosh, this is a lot. But I think it's nice to have a mixture between like some recalls. It's nice to have a little bit of like Invisalign thrown in there, maybe like a consult, a diagnostic. It's nice to have like something lengthier as well. So you're not, because if you have just a day back to back of checks and cleans and reviews and planning, that sort of stuff, it almost becomes a bit like speed dating. Like it's quite draining after a time. Which is, I normally work my week. So on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is like my day of like admin, study, whatever the heck else I need to get up to. Thursday and then Friday I'm clinical, and then Saturday, Sunday, thankfully, is mine. Because realistically, as a new grad, you're going to be Saturdays for a while. So I feel very blessed that we still book people in on Saturdays sometimes if we're doing a lengthier procedure, but it just depends. But yeah, I think having that mixture is a good thing. Because if you just do back-to-back really long appointments, you get very fatigued. But then if you're doing lots of short ones as well, by the end of the day, you're like, I don't know how to small talk anymore. Like I've forgotten like what day it is. Yeah, so I think I like the variety, and sometimes it's interesting to like, I'll do upgrades of like different pros, like all in four for Fadi as well, which is interesting. And it's something that like we never learned about that at university. So it's really nice learning more about like Zerks, and just, it's like a big Meccano set. It's really cool. So often like he'll have someone in his book who will be with him for part of it, and then it will get sent over to me for part of it. And then like we sort of work hand in hand too. So it's really varied. I like the variety.
Yeah, that's cool. You know, you get to be part of that process. You know, it's not just he does it all, and, you know, you still get to learn and work along the way.
Yeah.
So what do you kind of hope your ideal clinical or non-clinical day might look like in 5 years' time? And what kind of CPDs do you want to do to get to that point?
I think this year has been a very strong focus on the foundational stuff, like ortho massively. I know Vandana with Boss Ortho does a really good course, and Derek Mahoney does a really good conventional ortho course as well. And then looking at like, obviously working in a digital, like DSD official clinic. DSD is our life, our blood, our breath. So just really like honing in that process and understanding that clinically as well. But I think in 5 years' time, once I have those foundational aspects of like facial design, looking at the smile, etc., then probably looking down the road of implants. But I think there's no rush in that necessarily. Like ideally, I would love to be able to do all on four one day. But it's one of those things, you have to get very proficient at individual implants first. And I think there's this real trend on Instagram at the moment in particular, like veneers are old hat. Everyone's heard about veneers. Everyone does them now. A lot of people are starting to move into this all on four space, and it's an amazing transformative treatment, but it's also technically very, very challenging, and you do need a lot of experience to do it well. And again, we see a lot of cases where when people have stuffed it up, we then see the patients. And there's one case in particular recently that came to us that it was like really upsetting, to be honest, because this guy just hadn't had enough of an alveolectomy, and there was like this weird flange going on, and he couldn't clean anything, and the implants were failing. This poor guy has spent so much money, so much time, been through that surgical process, and he's just gotten this horrendous outcome. So I think like going into that, I want to make sure that I know what I'm doing really, really proficiently. Because even like you can have obviously the guides that show you where to place them and what to do, but it's once you've done that alveolectomy reduction and you've gotten into that space, the bone density can look like one thing, but once you actually start placing stuff, it's never quite what you expect. And you need to have that really sound understanding of how to mitigate those problems and how to react to get that outcome, because you can't just be like, all right, I'll close it up and we can try another day. No, you have to get it done then. So yeah, I would think that would be an interesting space, but I don't know if that's a 5-year timeline or whether that's more a 10-year timeline. It's just something to build towards.
Interesting. So we were putting out some questions out there to the Instagram and the Facebook community, and we got a question back, and it was, do you want to specialize or become a practice owner at some point?
No, I don't want to specialize. Hell no. No, I have so much respect for people who do that. I've got a good friend who's specializing in perio and a good friend who's specializing in pros at the moment. And we need people like that in the world, but I'm not one of those people. I think the thing that I've really learned working alongside Fadi is that, like, as a generalist, with the way that technology is going, you can become quite proficient in a lot of different areas, but then you also need to know when too far, like something is too much and too far and you need to send off. And we need those people who do that all the time, who are highly, highly skilled and specialized in that region, because you do get curly cases where you're like, oh, I don't know. In terms of practice ownership, that's an interesting one as well. I think business-wise, my interests probably lie external to dentistry long-term, purely for the fact that I feel it's an interesting industry. Like, it's a bit of an arms race and there's a lot of corporatization. FY Smile is a very unique place because Dr. Yassmin has built his reputation for years and years, and he's just the best at what he does. But he can exist the way that he does because he's so specialized. Whereas gone are the days in my eyes of like your 4-chair suburban practice that everybody comes to. It's just not really a thing as much anymore. In country areas to an extent, yes. Like, I was actually planning when I graduated to go back and work in rural areas that went really differently than what actually ended up happening. But yeah, I think even in rural areas, there is more corporate takeovers, and it just depends whether you want to be a shareholder with them. That doesn't really necessarily appeal to me. I think I'd rather have dentistry as my passion and then have like external businesses elsewhere. Yeah, like I was mentioning to you before, I run dog fan pages. I'm looking at the pet industry maybe in the future. Random. But yeah, I think that's, life is a game and there's so many fun games you can play, like just explore. And I think sometimes if you throw everything into one space, it becomes your all or nothing. And like, you can become very tired and jaded from that. Whereas if you've got a lot of different things going on, like, it keeps life really interesting. People ask me, oh, what are your hobbies? And I say work, which sounds really sad, but I love it because I'm doing so many different things all the time. It just keeps it interesting.
100%. I think you have to be open to change and adapting. I don't think, like to your point, you know, what happens if one day COVID hits and then you can't be working every day? What are you going to be doing in that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I won't keep you up for too much longer. Thank you, Dr. Emilia Judson, for coming on the show today. If you could let the people know how they can reach out to you or what's kind of going on in your life.
So probably the easiest place is just my Instagram page, Dr. Amelia Judson. Super original, I know. I've been really bad with the content. I filmed a lot of content, but as we were speaking before, it takes a long time to edit stuff. Even though I've outsourced it, I've just going through and reviewing what's there. Because that's one hard thing with dentistry. When you outsource to other people, they don't understand dentistry necessarily. It's like a bit of a learning curve to be like, this is what I want. This is what I need. Don't do this. Please do this. But it's also nice having fresh eyes, not in the industry, because then they can show you other interesting things and the way to portray stuff for a layman, which is good. But yeah, basically my Instagram is probably where it's at. Just inbox me, DM me. I mean, email me if you want. I'm okay at replying to emails, but yeah, always around to, I don't know what you would ask me, but if you want to ask me questions, go for it.
How about when they ask you how to open up a champagne bottle with a wine glass?
Oh yeah, that's well, look, there's a lot of outtakes that no one ever sees of me smashing a lot of glasses. I've also almost smacked someone in the head with the cork, but it's a very impressive like actual skill when it pulls off. So yeah, pretty much just I'll send you the YouTube link. It was my goal last year to learn, and I learned it. So yeah, I can pop that champagne open with a glass. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This has been really fun. I've really enjoyed it.
No, it was awesome having you. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Stay in tune for tomorrow again, because we'll be back with another awesome guest, James Tran. Have a good night, Dr. Amelia Judson.
Bye.
Bye.